I want to take a brief moment and apologize for my voice on this recording.
Oh, are you sick?
No, I went to an amusement park on Sunday.
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema, and my name is Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we watch and discuss a classic film from every year. This year we're in 1956, taking a look at The Searchers from director John Ford and starring John Wayne. For any new listeners, you can always find where our movies are streaming or available to rent online by checking our show notes.
Go check out our Facebook page, A Century in Cinema.
Yeah, we appreciate all the people who reviewed the podcast, who are listening in. It's quite a few of you, and I love that. Thank you very much to everyone.
All right. What's going down in 56?
Oh man, there's a lot.
I believe it.
Dwight D. Eisenhower is reelected president of the United States. Eisenhower also authorizes the creation of the interstate highway system. A fun little fact, Andrew, interstate highways were funded by the federal government in order to help facilitate evacuation routes in case of a nuclear attack. Bet you didn't know that.
I surprisingly did know that.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was actually taught to me by Mrs. Brown. Shout out to her, 7th grade history teacher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Well, over in the Soviet Union, the new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, denounces Stalin and starts dismantling his former government. There's a crisis in the Suez Canal in Egypt. That would take a little while to explain, so I won't even try. Wikipedia that for anyone interested.
It's a lot to unpack there.
That's all boring government stuff. Let's look at other things. More and more Americans are going off to college after high school around this time. About 1 in 3, I think. You see the first computer hard drive invented by IBM. Elvis Presley releases Heartbreak Hotel. My Fair Lady is on Broadway. As the World Turns and The Price is Right are on TV. You have the first Eurovision Song Contest.
Oh, wow.
And Grace Kelly, who we saw a few years ago in High Noon, marries Prince Rainier and thus becomes Princess of Monaco. I had no idea. Did we talk about that at all?
Did we not?
We might have missed it. That Grace Kelly just goes and becomes a literal princess.
I didn't realize it happened this quickly. Do you know how she died?
I might. I don't.
I just have to tell this story.
Yeah.
Well, she was not allowed to do film work anymore when she became princess. And she got a gig as a voiced character for an animated film. And she didn't want to anyone to interfere with her possibly being able to get the role. So she drove herself there. And she had a stroke. And she drove off the side of a mountain she drove off of a road into the side of a mountain, and her daughter was in the car with her, and her daughter survived.
Oh man, I've heard this story. This is tragic. Yeah. Yeah.
Horrible. Allegedly, there's so few actual details about it. We just know those little ones, but allegedly she was very frustrated with the amount of control the royal family had over her life. But, that's what happens.
That's the job.
I won't get too distracted on it, but just a few noteworthy films coming out this year. The King and I with Deborah Kerr, really wonderful musical film. The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the first film adaptation, comes out this year. This is the one that has a happy ending. And then we've already discussed Giant with James Dean, comes out this year. Fantastic film if you get a chance to watch it. And then Written on the Wind, Douglas Sirk melodrama, which is also a criticism of capitalism in the United States from a very early perspective. But yeah, it's a really good year for film.
I feel like we should at least mention The Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille.
Oh, yeah,
Huge film. Huge film.
I used to love that when I was a kid. And of course, The Searchers is released this year. Not the only John Wayne film to come out this year.
Oh, what's the other one?
The Conqueror. Interesting fact about The Conqueror, it was filmed in St. George, and it was really close to a site of recent nuclear weapons tests in Nevada. And so many people involved in the cast and crew, including John Wayne himself, would come down with some form of cancer throughout time. And many people blame the set being so close to a nuclear testing site.
Jeez, that reminds me of Tarkovsky's Stalker.
Stalker, exactly.
People on that set just straight up died because they were in the quarantine zone of a nuclear waste dump.
Not till like decades later. Like they just slowly died. Yeah. And I just wanted to bring that up because that's also, John Wayne did die of stomach cancer. And it's interesting because people are like, oh, that was probably from the nuclear site. But he also had lung cancer. And he said, no, that wasn't from any nuclear site. That's because I smoked 6 packs a day.
Right.
So at least we love a self-aware king. Unfortunately, John Wayne is not fully self-aware, but we'll get more into that. You got the plot?
Yeah, I got the plot. So The Searchers takes place in 1868 in Texas. Shortly after the Civil War, Ethan, played by John Wayne, returns home to the cattle ranch where his family lives and is struggling to get by, especially because of the Comanche Indian tribes nearby who are attacking them. During one of the attacks, Ethan's niece, Debbie, is taken captive, kidnapped. Ethan and his adopted nephew, Martin, who is 1/8 Comanche, embark on a dangerous search across the West Deserts in order to find Debbie. But it becomes increasingly clear that Ethan's motivations for tracking down his niece are dubious, and he actually intends to kill her, believing that she's been tainted by the Indian tribes she lives with now. After many years, they do eventually track her down. She's living as one of the wives to a Comanche chief named Scar. I'm going to kind of skip over a lot of subplots. There's a wedding and various things with the Texas Rangers and stuff like this. But during the final battle, when Ethan chases Debbie down, you think he's going to kill her, but then he picks her up and vows to take her home safely. Ethan brings her back to the cabin, and in an iconic final shot, we watch him from the doorway of the cabin as he walks back out into the desert.
I liked the movie. It was okay. There were parts of the film that were extremely dated to the point that it almost made me want to hate the whole thing. And I really didn't care about that romantic subplot. And there are also way too many comedic relief characters. All of that being said, it's almost completely null and void when you just stare at the sheer beauty of this film. And as has been stated on this podcast many times, I am like a very aesthetic film watcher. And the music and the imagery in this film was so, just jaw-droppingly gorgeous throughout that I was thoroughly entertained. Its perspective on race is naive, I would say, almost embarrassing when it's coming from the minds of like these men who are in their like 40s and 50s. But I did think John Wayne's performance was really great. It's almost hilarious because he is actually great, but then nobody else in the movie is like any good at all. So it's like he's really being sort of upped by his co-stars just not being very good in the movie. I don't know. That might be that. This is all subjective. What did you think of the movie?
Well, when we reviewed High Noon, I remember saying that I like Westerns because they offer us an insight into these myths that the American people tell themselves. And this is definitely a strange myth that people in America are telling themselves.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like Westerns in general, especially the early ones, the John Wayne ones, because of their relationship with Indians and American history. And it's such a bizarre and mutated relationship. I don't like this film.
Okay.
I think it's gorgeous. The Technicolor, VistaVision, all of that is beautiful, but it's all in service of something that I think at its heart is really quite ugly. And I know a lot of people who love cinema will defend this film. I think there's aspects of it that are absolutely worth defending. But I saw a lot of the themes that I really hate in a film like Birth of a Nation, and they're all here. And that's quite sad.
I think the thing about this movie, and regardless, like, it's not well executed, but there is like an attempt at some sort of sympathy for Native Americans coming through at the end. It's all complete hogwash and like doesn't really go in a way that could like actually convert someone's mindset or anything. But I think that's why, I mean, because, Martin Scorsese still claims this is one of his all-time favorite films.
George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, tons of great filmmakers. I mean, Akira Kurosawa looks up to John Ford, so I got to respect that.
So maybe I went into it being like, okay, I know there's a lot to unpack here, but I also know that a lot of my heroes in cinema are moved by this picture. And yeah, I mean, I found parts of it very moving. Did you watch this on HBO Max?
Yes.
That intro at the beginning was nice. I actually really enjoyed that. I did think it was just so funny how the intro was like, is this movie about racism or is it racist? You decide. And by the end, like everyone in my house was like, no, it was racist. Like,
yeah, I don't want to be the kind of person who says you can't have a racist character in your film. It reminds me of, there was like some Twitter mob that just went after a book because there were quotes taken out of context where someone was saying racist things. And John Wayne in this picture is a racist person, but that doesn't mean the heart of this film is necessarily racist. It's incredibly naive, though. If this is what passes for a progressive film in 1956, I mean, that just goes to show you how terrible everything else was before this.
Really reminds you like how lucky we are to be born in the generation we've been born in.
Yeah, I mean, modern Westerns, you have something like Wind River that confronts violence against Native American women.
Wind River's gender politics are totally screwed, man. I hate that movie.
There's problematic aspects with that film. But you compare something like that film to this, where the woman is kicked down the hill and John Wayne laughs his head off. Were you not horrified by that scene? I was horrified.
I was pretty horrified by that. Look, yeah, I felt really bad for her in general. She just really got the crappy end of the stick, huh?
And then they just kill her.
Yeah, I thought that was so... I mean, I even made like a passive joke about it. I thought, wow, they really introduced a female character of color and gave her like a small arc and then killed her off like unceremoniously, all within the course of this one montage of reading this letter. Like, what was even the point of all that?
To be funny.
Yeah, all the comedy has not aged well. Everyone in the film except for Ethan and Lori, played by Vera Miles, everyone else is a complete idiot. And not like stupid in the plot, like they literally can't read. They don't know how to talk well. If it was actually making a full statement about that, which I thought it was going to at the beginning, because he's like, he gets there and the kids are like, oh my gosh, how's the war going? And he's like, the war ended 3 years ago. And so it's already giving us this sort of weird faux narrative in the South that there's still a chance for the Confederacy to win well after the Civil War has been won. And I was like, oh, okay, it's going to have like that interwoven throughout. But then they never really circled back to that ever again. So yeah, I don't know. That was frustrating to me, was all the like stupidity. I couldn't really get into that.
Getting us back onto the topic of, is this film racist? You say yes, absolutely.
I do, because even his whole arc of coming to terms with
John Wayne's arc, right?
Yes. Even John Wayne's whole arc with coming to terms with Native American people is all done on the pivot of this actual white woman who was taken in by Native Americans. And it's just so dumb, because it's like he didn't change his perspective on Comanche people. He just didn't murder the woman who he was trying to save for the entire movie. And then we're like, oh, he's not racist anymore. Like, that kind of is the way his arc is portrayed. And I thought that was silly because the sequence where he was chasing Natalie Wood on his horse, I really did think he was going to try and kill her or something. But then when he didn't, I thought, oh, well, I don't believe that he's changed. I just believe that he didn't actually want to murder his family. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't know. And I could tell that for the purposes of a plot, like from the basics of a screenplay, that was meant to be the moment of change for his character, because we have seen him be a horrible racist throughout the whole movie. I just feel like there could have been, I don't know how you would do it. I'm not here to like rewrite a film from the 50s.
Right.
Especially one that's so widely praised. But again, I really do want to circle back on this. I had a good time watching it, and I really was blown away by the beauty of the film. And I do understand why it's considered a classic of its genre. One thing about this film being racist that I think is weird is there's so much talk about Natalie Wood being in brownface. This is a hot take, but she really isn't, right?
Natalie Wood was in brownface?
Just her playing, it's sort of one of those like go-to conversation topics on this film is that Natalie Wood plays a racist caricature of a Native American or something. And then they show that clip of her having like a horrible Comanche accent. She's trying to, even Natalie Wood is just horrible in this movie. Like, it's just so weird how none of the acting is good in this movie, except for John Wayne.
Did I just totally forget that part? Am I spacing it?
So the first time they try to rescue her, she comes back and she says something to them, which means like go away in Comanche.
But she's in brownface? She has makeup on?
Well, she does have makeup on to make her skin look darker in a way that like a white person's skin would be darker if they were exposed to the sun for like that for 5 years straight.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like
there's literal brownface in this film.
Yes.
I didn't think we were going to talk about Natalie Wood.
Exactly.
Some makeup on. Like there's real problems, and that's not one of them.
That's my thing. Yeah, is that it's so weird to me that that's one of the discussion points, because people are like, oh, they have this white woman playing a Native American character. And I'm like, well, you haven't seen the movie, because she is a white woman. She was taken in by Native Americans. That's like the whole point of the entire movie.
Oh, so weird. I didn't read anything up on that. I didn't see that.
And I knew about that before the film started. Like, that was what I went in knowing, was that, oh, there's going to be like Natalie Wood in brownface. And I was not in any way prepared for Henry Brandon to actually be in brownface as the chief, Scar. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just feel like I wanted to make a comment about that, because I was like, wait, there's so much actual racism in this movie, and this is what people are talking about. This is like the only thing that actually makes sense within the depiction of Native American people in the film.
I want to talk a little bit about John Wayne's character, and just knowing the reputation this film had, I expected him to go through some sort of radical change or anything. And he's basically the same person at the beginning and at the end. I guess I'm just baffled that this is not seen as just this really clearly promoting a mindset of hatred towards Native Americans.
He's still like the hero of the film, and he's still a huge racist. And at this point, John Wayne was just at peak popularity. And so many American moviegoers, especially in the South, really like looked up to him and saw him as sort of this personification of the American ideal. And so, you know, it doesn't really matter if you give him that moment of change at the end or not, especially with the way it's so clumsily handled. I would agree. I was thinking, okay, well, I think anyone who was, you know, in any way still clinging onto the Confederacy in 1956 watching this film would be like, yeah, he's right. Because it's like, okay, this film has very false depictions of Native American people in general. There weren't a huge amount of people reported to be kidnapped or like inducted or even like, you know, horribly murdered by Native American people in the way that this film depicts it happening within actual confrontations over land and over things like that, which, you know, if we're going to point a finger, that was on us. That was on the white people going in to take the land in the first place, that those conversations happened. But outside of that, there weren't like these mass murderings. This was actually based on a very specific story. The original book is based on this story of this young girl who was kidnapped. And then the book has a completely different ending where he does try to murder the girl. And she does not want to, because she doesn't want to go away with him at all. Even the second time they come back to get her, they go in and murder the tribe. She runs away. He tries to kill her. She narrowly escapes, and then she dies of heat exhaustion. And then he's forced to come to terms with the fact that he forced her to have this horrible, painful death because he couldn't overcome his own racism. So it
doesn't that feel like more of the condemnation you expected of his character? And I guess maybe you can't do that because it is John Wayne and people look up to him, so you can't have him be this tragic figure at the end.
Yeah.
Do you know if that story was based on the story of Cynthia Ann Parker, who was kidnapped by Comanches?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly who it was.
Because that was a very famous case back in, the late 1800s when the whole Texas Indian Wars were going on.
Mm-hmm.
You can stumble across that story pretty easily when you start to look into it. And yeah, all cards on the table. I know very, very little about the Texas Indian Wars. I have to, as in any war, I would assume that there's marauders on both sides, bad people, good people on both sides. But the way that this film is presented, it would put all of the blame on the Comanche as the evil raiding Indians, just going after the poor white folk.
Exactly. Precisely.
Just giving someone like John Wayne the justification that they so desire for their attitudes towards all Indians. It's an ugly, ugly film. I don't know how I can get over that.
Yeah, I'm not going to try and make you either, man. I will still defend the aesthetics of this movie. I mean, that opening shot is one of the iconic shots of cinema, and you can see why. I mean, as soon as it started, my jaw just dropped. Monument Valley has never looked that beautiful, but yeah, beauty of an art piece can only take it so far, especially when it does have such an ugly underbelly as this one does. Yeah, it's a complicated movie with a complicated history. I don't know what to make of all the modern praise for it, because it is still on the Sight and Sound Top 10, and it is still praised as one of the all-time great films, and it is praised as that because of its perspective on racial relations between white people and Native Americans.
Ooh.
You watch it and you think, huh?
Yeah. What am I missing?
Did I miss a huge scene where everyone started dancing and saying we're not racist anymore? I just didn't see that part of the movie. Yeah, Natalie Wood just doesn't get brutally murdered by her own uncle, and therefore now no one's racist. I just didn't understand.
Did you read the theories that Natalie Wood is actually playing his daughter?
Yeah, I thought that made sense. I mean, that was actually kind of what I gathered that just from watching the movie, because they have that weird longing and stuff, and she's 8 years old, and they make a big point of it being 8 years since he was there, and I was like, oh, wink, wink, because, I was thinking for sure that was going to be the big reveal, but I was really happy that it wasn't. They could have definitely cut something out of that marriage scene for sure, and then added that in. But again, I guess I'm not trying to rework a script from 1956 as badly as I want to.
And really quick, in our discussion on High Noon, I linked to a Playboy interview with John Wayne that they conducted in the early 1970s. I actually went back and read all of that interview. And John Wayne says some pretty horrific things about Indians. The Playboy interviewer asks him, Indians have always played an important role, if subordinate, in your Westerns. Do you feel any empathy with them? Wayne responds, I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them, if that's what you're asking. Our so-called stealing of this country from them was just a matter of survival. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. End quote. He is the guy in this film.
I mean, again, I just want to really emphasize he was the icon of cinema at this time. And a lot of people to this day, people who grew up in the era of him being a huge movie star, even people who grew up in like the 70s and 80s, they can get a little defensive about the reassessment of him in modern times. And I can understand that. He was also a huge proponent of cancer research. I mean, he wasn't, he's not like this altogether horrible person. He's a human being with a bunch of layers, a bunch of things going on for him. But he was this level of racism. I mean, not just against Native Americans, against Black people as well in that same interview. It's like, he literally says the words, "I believe in white supremacy." And it's like, Black people have to be subservient for us for just a little while longer until we can even things out with society. They can't just take over. That's like his perspective. He like sees them as this lesser than person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, not great. I mean, he clearly had his own insecurities going on. And I will say, he was just a part of that generation of men who weren't really supposed to express emotions or suffering or pain. And while I'm not going to defend anyone's actions, I am going to say that's a part of his psyche. And I think he's sort of the personification of it, as far as how we can look into that now, just because he was such a public figure and there's so much public information about him. But I mean, all that aside, I do think he's a brilliant performer, truly. Like, I've seen so many John Wayne movies, and I always think he's a really fantastic actor.
I saw that he didn't get much recognition from within the film industry, and especially from critics, and it wasn't until True Grit, very late in his career, that he was awarded an Oscar, even though... I
love that movie.
I understand he's sort of playing a parody of himself, almost.
Yeah, and that was another one that my dad and I used to watch all the time when I was young, so a very special attachment to it.
Yeah, I gotta watch that one.
But yeah, I mean, kind of a parody of himself, but I mean, he also is still playing the John Wayne character.
And John Wayne's original name before he became an actor?
Marion Robert Morrison.
I love that.
Do you know that he had this huge story about how his middle name was actually Michael because they named his brother Robert, but that was never a legal change or anything. It was just something that they said in his family, was that his name was actually Marion Michael Morrison, but they never legally changed it or anything. And then he's like, actually, my name is John Wayne. Great stage name. Oh my gosh. Whoever came up with that, hats off.
It captures everything you would expect from that gritty American ideal. John Wayne.
John Wayne.
The only other Western we watched on our list is High Noon. And this is more of a traditional Western.
I will say this. I mean, I did prefer High Noon, and I also have a very strong attachment to High Noon, as we discussed in that episode. And I don't have that same connection with this film. And also, there was a lot about this film I didn't like. That all being said, the action sequences in this movie are so ridiculously good, so beautifully filmed, so well choreographed. Every chase sequence, every single moment, that huge rate when they're going into the Comanche tribe and it's that huge panning shot, like it's clearly like on a car or something chasing on the sides of the horses. I mean, I see a shot like that and my adrenaline just gets pumping. Like, that is what we watch Westerns for, is that it's you really are kind of hoping for that big action moment. And I thought this film delivered on every front. All of the horse stunts were jaw-dropping. I loved getting to watch a Western for this podcast where it was like literally cowboys versus Indians, and it was all, these huge action sequences and all these big major shootouts throughout the whole film. Yeah, I thought it was really entertaining.
All right, the big giant action scenes in this are a lot of fun. The cavalry riding in. You got to appreciate the technical mastery of stuff like that in the middle of a desert, following the horses in, and just these insane battles compared to something like High Noon, where the real thrill is in the tension winding up throughout the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a review this week, we usually do a review from the time period, usually from Bosley Crowther at the New York Times. Bosley Crowther and Variety didn't have anything super interesting to say back in 1956 about the Searchers.
Excuse you. The pull quote from that review is so good. He called it a rip snorting western. I read the Bosley Crowther review just because I assumed we were going to discuss it today, and then I was like, oh, I thought that was the funniest. It feels like the beginnings of that, like, this is going to be the quote that goes in the DVD. Like, obviously, this is before.
Rip snorting adventure.
When did VHS start up? I guess that wasn't for another couple decades, huh?
Oh, yeah, not now.
Yeah, no, not now. But still, it has that, like, tagline feel to it. Rip snorting western. Anyways.
All right. All that is to say that we're not doing a review this week. We don't have a review linked in the show notes. Instead, we have something that I find very interesting.
Yes.
Linked is a clip from the behind the scenes sort of documentary film that they put together at Warner Brothers Studio for The Searchers. And it's noteworthy because this was the first behind the scenes feature that was produced specifically to kind of showcase what it's like to make a movie behind the scenes.
I do want to clarify that that's for Hollywood. We don't really know whether that was being done before this or not, as far as like other countries or even...
Right. Every time on this podcast that we say, this is the first time someone did this, just assume that's not true. Someone else did it first.
Exactly. There we go.
We just
I
can't
love
quite
we built
trace
so
it.
many fail safes into this podcast along the way. We can do no wrong.
All right, so you watched this, right?
Yeah. It's funny. When you sent it to me, I thought that was so funny because I'd already watched it, and that was already one of my talking points, was talking about the behind the scenes for it.
Oh, cool.
When it first started, I thought, oh, this is like not actual behind the scenes. They got this guy on a set and put Monument Valley behind him. But then they actually showed behind the scenes footage, and I thought, oh, okay, cool.
That's the thing that stood out to me, was that they clearly set up a thing in a soundstage for this person to pretend like they were at Monument Valley presenting the making of this film. I mean, no one was fooled by that, right? I just thought that was funny.
Who knows what that actually looked like when, like, being projected through a film reel, you know, especially if it was something that was being done as the promotional material before another movie.
I think this was shown on television.
Oh, then who knows what it looked like? You know, like I would say projection probably had way more fidelity at this point than televisions did. So it probably looked a lot more convincing on a 1950s TV box than it does on our high resolution YouTube streaming platform.
But it's so funny, right? Because they hired actors to like carry ladders and camera gear across this set as if they're going to the set.
And then they cut to the actual BTS and it doesn't, like, the film stock is completely different. You can tell immediately, like, oh, we're not on that soundstage anymore. I mean, yeah.
The other thing I love in this is that they have Jeffrey Hunter, now not in brownface, but presenting the BTS feature and kind of setting it up. And he looks so uncomfortable. I thought that was funny.
The cut to his headshot, and the headshot, it looks like you can see the pain in his eyes. It's like he has just sold his soul to the Hollywood devil. He has just had to do a deed that he did not want to do to be able to get his career in Hollywood. I'll leave it at that. I'm just saying you can see the fear and the pain in his eyes. But that being said, and even like me complaining about his performance, I mean, he's gorgeous. This podcast is now me just like every single episode I find a man and just be like, this man is so beautiful. But like Jeffrey Hunter is a gorgeous man.
The BTS feature also has some interesting insights into how they basically built a little city out there near Monument Valley, and they even paved roads to get to it. All sorts of little tidbits like that we've been missing from other films because behind the scenes features didn't exist or were very hard to find.
Yep.
So it's interesting to see how a film like this all comes together. It's a huge operation. No surprise. Just imagine how big you think it is and then maybe triple or quadruple that. It takes so many people to put this together.
Yeah, for sure. It feels like a huge rollicking Western with hundreds of people behind the camera.
All right. That's what I got to talk about.
Is that it?
That's all I got. This is one of those moments where I feel really bad about the fact that we're just kind of skimming over all these films as we watch them week by week. Because John Ford and John Wayne are huge cinematic icons, like you've said.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to dive deeper into the psychology of their films and, yeah, just the lineage that they go through. Because they've been making films since the 30s together, since Stagecoach.
Yeah. The way I see that, just talking about this podcast from an outsider perspective, we're both about to turn 30 and like we're reassessing the films we actually want to study and the films that we're finding interesting. And I think that this has been really, really great for that because, you know, yeah, right now we're sort of forcing ourselves to do like kind of like a whole film course a week for ourselves, for like our personal research and everything, you know, like I would definitely say the amount of work we're putting into these is something equivalent to, you know, an overview of that year in general.
Yeah.
And by the end of the course, you know, by the end of the almost 2 years it's going to take, it's like whatever sticks. And that's like what we're going to actually study and be interested in. Yeah. And, you know, some of it might not, you know, like I'll probably never read another H.G. Wells book again. But yeah, I would agree. I was interested in watching more John Ford films because the only other one I've seen is Stagecoach.
Mm-hmm.
It also has, you know, a perspective on Native Americans that I don't agree with. So maybe it is a John Ford thing. Who knows? Yeah,
so I guess I'm just trying to put down some statement to justify the fact that, you know, there's more to learn. We don't know everything.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would say this is probably one of the worst movies we've watched so far. But we've also just watched a plethora of great films, and I still do see the value in this movie, and I still did enjoy myself while I was watching it. I was not bored. I was very entertained. Yeah, there's a lot of problematic elements to it, which I weirdly feel would be as big of an issue for me if the film wasn't being lauded as some sort of revolutionary take on race relations. It's like that element of its legacy and its perspective that makes me even more sensitive to its problematic elements. Because, I mean, in the end, we are watching a Western from 1956. I'm not going to go into that and think nothing problematic is going to happen, you know? Like, I know what I'm signing up for. But it's the fact that it has this weird reputation of being this step forward that makes me more sensitive to its problematic elements. Does that make sense?
Well put. I think so.
Thank you.
I have said my piece. It's a weird movie.
Yeah, and when I was
you know what, I want to point something out that's so strange.
Let's do it. I know when I'm the one being interrupted, it's good. I interrupt all the time, but Arthur never does.
The most problematic aspects of a film like Birth of a Nation are the black people stealing white women and this threat to the white man's sexuality and masculinity because they're losing their women to the minorities, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's a horrific part of Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
And that's the entire point of this film. John Wayne on a quest to go save the white woman from the raping, pillaging Indian tribes. Like you said, it's just so bizarre that this film is lauded for its progressive, quote unquote, depiction of race relations. Birth of a Nation was 1915.
Yeah. To further complicate it, now I want to say something as well. let's just pretend that the ending totally worked for the audience. That the ending, when he decides not to kill Natalie Wood's character, we really do see that as a genuine moment of him having mercy on a Native American. For that to be your perspective, you would have to already share his perspective that, like, these white people are being converted to Native Americans in this gruesome, horrible way. Because earlier in the film, we see other white people who were taken in by Native Americans acting all crazy, and he's like, they're not white anymore. Like, you would have to share that perspective, which is hugely racist, to believe that she was actually Native American and therefore he had actually overcome something. So even to, like, be able to sympathize with the film's he's not racist anymore element, you have to also sympathize with this huge other racist element of the film. So it's just like this weird, never-ending circle that doesn't go anywhere or do anything. There you go. Yeah, and it's difficult because if we were to be able to, like, record a whole commentary track where we're talking about all of the different locations and all of the different sets, and we'd done all this research and knew all of the stuff of behind the scenes and everything, we'd probably be able to talk about this a lot more. But we aren't. We're doing this, like, hour-long podcast, and the way this film presents itself and the way we as a 2021 audience watch it, for just an hour-long podcast, there is, like, not much to discuss outside of its hugely racist elements. So,
and I don't think the filmmakers sat down and thought, man, how are we going to really justify the genocide of the Native Americans during the Texas Indian Wars? But that's what sticks out to me when I watch this film. It's epic. It's gorgeous. But it's all in the service of a story and a theme that is so ugly. All right. You like Westerns, right?
Yeah, generally.
Okay. Like Sergio Leone.
Oh, the spaghetti Westerns are, oh my God, that's out of my heart, man.
Like when I think of Westerns, I think of those films.
Which is so funny because, like, the whole production behind those was like, we're going to use all of these sensibilities in making a traditional Western, and then all of the writing and the depiction of the characters is just going to be a parody of it. Like, that was why they were called spaghetti Westerns, was because it was supposed to be, like, sort of a joke on the Western while also being made as a legitimate Western. But, again, in 2021, actually, pretty much for the past 10 years, like, the current generation really does see those as the authentic Westerns, which I'm all for, because those are the good ones. Those are, like, the fun ones. I've seen so many boring Westerns in my life, but, like, spaghetti Westerns are fantastic. We're doing Once Upon a Time in the West, right?
I'm excited. I'm so excited.
So good. And that, well, nope, I won't say anything more.
No spoilers?
Yeah. Well, not even spoilers, just my opinions, which I would rather not be like, did I already say this on another episode?
I want to dive more into John Ford, John Wayne. I want to dive more into the Texas Indian Wars and the story of Cynthia Ann Parker. There's a lot of background to this film that I'm not going to be able to do because we got to move on. Okay, what are we watching next week?
Next week, we are watching The Cranes Are Flying, directed by Mikhail Kalatazov, which is probably pronounced incorrectly. And I
appreciate your confidence, though. That was
yes. Good. And I am not going to spare any more details for this one because I have a lot to talk about next week.
Cool. I'm going into it completely blind, which is exciting.
Yes.
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.